So here, this is what we spoke about yesterday at the end of yesterday's shir. Nakom nikmas b'nei Yisrael me'es hamidyonim, that they have to go out to take vengeance on what the Midianites did. We spoke about this idea that because what they did seemingly wasn't such a terrible thing in their eyes, it wasn't something painful. Therefore, they have to be given the motivation to turn it into something. They've got to turn it into something which is going to take them into war. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to overcome the Midianites. And then that's the last thing that Moshe Rabbeinu is going to do as the leader of the Jewish people, because at that point, after he's fulfilled that one task, he's going to be what's euphemistically called gathered up unto his people, which means that he's going to die, he's going to pass away. So we need people for the army. This is the last thing that we spoke about yesterday, right? Yeah, that the army is going to be made up. It's not going to be the standing army. Rather, it's going to be made up of 1,000 people from each tribe. In verse number 4, we've got this rather strange syntax of elef lamateh lechol Mattot Yisrael tishtachul tzava, which is it's very repetitive. Rashi explains that it's going to require 1,000 people from each tribe, including Shevet Levi, which means this is one of the few times that we've got everybody coming together. Shevet Levi, as a rule, weren't included in the army. They didn't go to fight because they were the spiritual leaders of the Jewish people, but this time they had to send in 1,000 like everybody else. However, the Gemara learns out that it wasn't just 1,000 people going to fight. There were going to be 1,000 people from each tribe that were chosen to learn as well, which means that you've got 1,000 being involved in spiritual endeavors and 1,000 being involved in the physical dimension of war, and that way each one is going to be successful. And then yesterday, the last thing that we ended up with was V'yimasru me'alfei Yisrael elef lamatei shnei maseh elef chalutzei tzava. It says that 12,000 people went out to war. Now that doesn't make sense, because Rashi taught us that it needs 1,000 from each tribe. And if you want to say that the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh were doubled up and they became the tribe of Joseph, well, that's not very fair. But we're talking about taking people into war over here, which means that if each tribe has to cough up 1,000 people, there's no reason why Ephraim and Manasseh between them should only cough up 500 in order to reach the quota. But rather, we spoke about yesterday, the first word in verse number 5, Yimasru, is passive. That when the Jewish people found out that they were going to go to war, and this was the last thing that Moshe was going to do, and then he was going to die, then at that point the Jewish people said they don't want to go to the army. The only tribe that actively sent people off into the army straight away without any kind of calculations whatsoever was the tribe of Levi. Which means the Yimasru, 12,000 of these soldiers were given over, they went passively. They didn't go actively. But the other 1,000 from the tribe of Levi, they went off. They only are interested in doing the will of God, regardless of whether it's good or bad. Right now, doing what God wants them to do is going to be bad, because that's going to cause Moshe to die. But nevertheless, they understand that ultimately everything that God wants is going to be good. Therefore, they're prepared to do it, even if it's seemingly be bad for them. So verse number 6, Vayishlach Osam Moshe elef lematei latzava. He sends them off into the army. Osam v'yes Pinchas ben Elazar kohen latzava. And who else does he send off? So interestingly enough, he sends off Pinchas. Now, for those of you who are following what's been going on, of course, last week's Parsha was called Parshas Pinchas. Pinchas is this zealot who goes and kills not only the prince of the tribe of Shimon, but also the Midianite princess who he happened to be having relations with at the same time. He spears them together in the midst of what they're doing. He spears them together onto a spear and then takes it outside to show everybody. And Pinchas is somebody who's he's an interesting personality. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says it's not enough to send the people out into war, but you have to send Pinchas together with them. Now, interestingly enough, as a rule, when the Jewish army went out to war, there was a Kohen, somebody called the Kohen HaMashuach, who went out to war together with them. And he would be there in order to give, spiritual, moral support for everything that was going on. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu choose Pinchas to go? Because Pinchas was the one who started everything over here. right? The girls of Midian who started prostituting themselves and sleeping with the Jewish people, that whole episode came to an end because of what Pinchas did, right? And it requires, HaKadosh Baruch Hu feels that it requires Pinchas's zealotry to go out to war together with them in order to keep them motivated, in order to keep them on track in the place that they're supposed to be. So what do? He says to send Pinchas, and he took within the silver trumpets, something that goes back a few weeks, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded Moshe Rabbeinu to make silver trumpets. They're there in order to call the Jewish people together. They're there also to give out commands. Right? In the olden days, that's the way that commands were given. Some kind of, musical instrument, whether it was a trumpet, whether it was a horn of some kind. In Scotland, they use bagpipes. Whatever you happen to have handy. Over here, it was these silver trumpets. Vayitzba'u, verse number 7. Vayitzba'u Midian, they gathered around, getting ready to go in. Kashetiv Hashem es Moshe, v'yagu kol zachar, they killed all of the males over there. This Malchi Midian Hagu, and the king of Midian they killed as well. Al Chalaleim, es Evev, yes Rekem, yes Tov, yes Chov, yes Reva, Chamesh es Malchi Midian. These 5 kings of Midian were killed. How can you have 5 kings in one country? So in the olden days, the system was very simple. The system was that each city had its own leader, and that leader had a din of being a king, which means that you can have a country, and within that country, you won't normally have one leader ruling everybody. There may have been one king who was stronger than everybody else. It's conceivable that there was one king who the other kings swore their allegiance to, but within each city, the king it was his domain. It belonged to him. It was like it was his country. And then at the end of verse number 9, there's a very strange piece of detail over here. That Bil'am ben Be'or hagu b'chorev. Now we got to go back a couple of weeks, right? Page 904.
Thank you.
We got to go back a couple of weeks into the Parsha of Balak. If you remember, who was Bilam? Who remembers this stuff?
It's like the prophet.
Right, he's a sort of a prophet, right? He's the prophet to the non-Jewish nations. He's a sorcerer. He's bad news, right? He's the one who tries to curse the Jewish people, and he's the one who comes up with the idea of using immorality to weaken the Jewish people.
He was a Midianite?
No.
It's not clear, right?
No.
What was he?
So according to the Gemara, the name Bil'am is an acronym for Bli-Am. He doesn't belong to anybody. He's a mercenary. Right? He's as loyal as your bank account is big. Which means if you pay him, then he'll be on your side. If you don't pay him, then he won't. At least there are no surprises by him, right? The question over here is, what's he doing over here? The last time we came across Bilam, him and Balak parted ways, right? Balak got very upset with him, and off he went. What's he doing back here? So explains the Medrash like this. And I think there's a very beautiful, sort of very, very exquisite irony over here. That when Bilam found out that his plan to destroy the Jewish people had worked up to a certain point, if you remember, 24,000 people died in the aftermath of the prostitution of the daughters of Moab. So what happens over there? Bilam suddenly realizes, hold on a second, my plan worked. I need to get paid. So he comes back to get payment for what he's done. Right? Whilst he's there, he gets caught up in the battle, and in the battle he dies. So over here, right now, which means that, of course, I guess lesson number 1 is don't be too greedy.
Don't come back.
Yeah, if you've managed to get away from somewhere and you're safe and sound, so maybe that's the place that, remain safe and sound. That's the way to do it. But there's an interesting piece of information over here which seems to be somewhat superfluous. Says verse number 9 at the end, it says, there's Bilam ben Be'or hargu b'charev. He died by the sword. Now, why do we care how Bilam died?
Aren't there, depending on the crime, the capital punishment is determined accordingly? So by the sword has some significance.
Oh, interesting. Under normal circumstances, we would say that if somebody's being described as being killed by the sword, then that's going to fit into one of the 4 different methods that the Beis Din are allowed to execute somebody. And this is, obviously it's describing the way that he's being executed. But over here, Chazal explained, the sages explained that it's not like that. The sages explained something else altogether. Bilam, where did he get his strength from?
His blind eye.
From his blind eye. Good, right?
Is that not true?
Yeah, up to a certain point. Actually, I mean, he gets a certain power comes out of that eye that doesn't see, but the power that he wields is what kind of power? It's verbal power. What's called in the language of the sages koach hadibur, the power of speech. Like Bilam's not a fighter. He doesn't go out. He's not like he's not like a Goliath, where he'll go out and he'll frighten everybody with his size and his physical prowess. But rather, Bilam's whole essence is the power of speech.
Abracadabra.
Abracadabra, right? However you want to describe it, but nevertheless, all of us know that the power of speech is something incredibly powerful. It really is. I mentioned a few weeks ago, there's an adage that says, "Sticks and stones can break my bones, but names will never harm me," and it's not true. Whoever made that it's not true. If anything, it's the other way around, right? The names that stick with people often are more destructive. A person can be beaten up, but they'll get well. So their black eyes will disappear, and the scars will heal, and the bruises will go. But the inner scars that exist, those are something which are not going to be taken care of so easily. You can't just put a plaster, but a piece of Band-Aid over somebody's emotional well-being in the hope that they're going to be okay. Which means that Bilam's his power exists within the power of his mouth.
But there's a nefach to what he says. There's curse.
Oh, for sure. Which means like this: that the koach hadibur, the power of his mouth, the power of his speech, has the most tremendous physical repercussions to it.
Because he is special in what way? Because he has prophecy.
Interesting. Even before he had prophecy, he had this ability to recognize. He had an inner ability to be able to curse people. You should know up to and including today. Even though this stuff is very, very esoteric. Really, it's very, very difficult for us to relate to it in a direct fashion. But there are people today, without a doubt, who have the power to curse other people.
And the opposite.
And the opposite. You have people.
Calls up a lady and says, my son has lost the plot, and she does something. And the next morning he wakes up with a smile on his face.
Yeah, isn't that interesting, right? Which means that, how does it work? I don't know how it works, right? It's something to do with tapping into spiritual realms, and in the same way that you can tap into spiritual realms in the positive dimension, which means that you can bring a source of blessing onto people. So too, there are people who don't have access to the source of blessing, but they have access to the source of curse. They're able to curse people. Again, how does it work? How effective is it? I don't know. I really don't. But Bilam is somebody who does not get involved in physical fights. Bilam's abilities exist in the spiritual realms through what's called koach hadibur, through the power of speech. However, what we're taught is it's interesting that it says that when Yaakov Avinu approached his father, Yitzchak, Isaac, pretending to be Esav, so what did Yitzchak say? What did Isaac say? He said, Ayadayim yidei Esav. The hands belong to Esav. Aval hakol kol Yaakov. But the voice belongs to Jacob. Which means the concept of koach hadibur, the concept of using speech in order to elevate, the concept of using speech in order to become greater and better and closer to God is something which to a certain extent defines the Jewish essence. That's what we're supposed to do, right? Inside of the temple, the most focal dimension of the inner dimension of the temple was the prayers that took place over there. We have no temple today, so what do? We pray instead. The idea of being able to The idea of being able to pray to God, more than that, we're taught that when you learn, when you study, and say you're learning Mishnah or you're learning Gemara, right? The sages teach us that you should say the words out loud. There's a certain power to being able to recite the words out loud, to be able to say them. I had a teacher when I was in school. Not a Jewish teacher, right? He taught a non-Jewish subject, right? He taught us French, and he told us that if you want to learn French vocabulary, he says you got to say the words, say them out loud, keep repeating them over and over again. He says don't say them in your mind. He says because you'll never pick them up. When you say something, it then goes out and comes back in, and it sits inside of you, it becomes a part of you. Which means that the Koach HaDibur is something which belongs to the Jewish people. Bilam, what did he try to do? He tried to usurp the power of the Jewish people. He tried to take that and utilize it for himself in order to curse the Jewish people, to use the very thing that the Jewish people have, to use it against them. So what does it say over here? It says that Bilam, how did he die? He died Hagu B'Chorev. He died by the sword. The sword really belongs to who? The sword belongs to the non-Jewish nations of the world. That's a certain kind of a distribution over here, a certain kind of a Kodesh Baruch Hu separating dimensions, which means that the Koach, Akol Kol Yaakov, the Koach HaDibur, the power of speech, belongs to us. But there has to be something which is the equal and opposite force against that, which is the Cherev, right? The Yadayim, Yadei Esav, the physicality of Esav. It's the spirituality versus the physicality. And that's been given over to Esav. What did Bilam do? Bilam took something which belongs in its essence to the Jewish people. He tried to take the spirituality and to hijack it and to use it in a different way. So how does he die? In a certain inverse midah keneged midah, an inverse measure for measure, he's killed by the sword. The truth is, if you stop and think about it for a minute, with everything that Bilam did, you would expect Bilam to be killed by, Moshe Rabbeinu, reciting some kind of incantation, and Bilam will drop down dead. But in the end, how does he die? He dies using the force that belongs to the non-Jewish nations, which means there's been a role reversal. Bilam tried to use the Jewish force, so the Jews use the non-Jewish force in order to destroy him. Vayishbu b'nei Yisrael es neshei Midian v'estapam, and they took their women and they took their children as hostages. V'yeskol bentam v'yeskol mikneihem, and all of their flocks and their cattle. V'yeskol chelam bazazu. V'yeskol areihem b'moshvoisam v'yeskol tiroisam sofu ba'esh, and they destroyed everything that was there. Now we're going to see something very strange over here. Vayikhu es kol hashalal v'yes kol amal koyach ba'odam u'v'behemo. They took all of the booty together with them. All of this. What's it called? Not booty. What's it called? Oh, here booty. Okay, all of the booty together with them. Ve'aviu al Moshe ve'elazar kohen ve'ladas b'nei Yisrael. They bring all of this stuff to Moshe and to Elazar the Kohen and to everybody else. Now, what would we expect the reaction of Moshe Rabbeinu to be at this point? Should be happy, no? They went out to war. They did what they were supposed to do. They came back with a lot of bounty, a lot of booty, right? Spoils. Thank you. A lot of spoils. I don't know. Booty sounded something. Something little babies are supposed to have, right? Yeah. All the spoils of war. You would expect Moshe to come out and say, "Well done, guys. You did a great job," right? What do we see here? Verse number 13. Vayetzu Moshe ve'Elazar kohen v'chol nisei ha'ida likrosom. They go out of the camp. Moshe and Elazar and the priests and the princes go out of the camp. Now, we need to understand, Moshe's not doing this in order to greet the soldiers coming in. Rather, Moshe's going out in order to make sure that they don't come into the camp. We'll see in a minute why. He gets very upset with them from the soldiers that are coming in. Here, over the page. Why did you leave the females alive? Now, again, we need to try to understand over here what's going on. Under normal circumstances, when you go to war, right, the war is normally against whom? Huh?
The men.
The men, right? Men go out to war and they fight against each other, and a standard dimension of warfare, certainly in the olden days, was that whoever won then took all the women for themselves. And as everybody here knows, if you've ever learned any history, you'll know perfectly well that the cases of, you know, what goes on with the victorious army coming through and to the women that are living over there, it's something absolutely terrible. The truth is, up to and including today, not a lot has changed, right? Because it was standard that the women were left alive. And yet Moshe Rabbeinu is very upset. He says, why do you leave the women alive? Why would that be? Because the whole war that's taking place over here began with who?
Women.
With the women, right? The women prostituted themselves. The women were the one that caused the Jewish people to become impure. The women were the ones who started the whole process that ended up with 24,000 dead people within the Jewish camp. And when Moshe Rabbeinu sent them out to battle, it didn't occur to him that they wouldn't realize that they're supposed to kill the women as well, because the women, Lamaisa, the women were the instigators of whatever happened over there. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, they were the ones that caused a betrayal of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They caused you to act in the way that you acted. It's very interesting, right? This is really not politically correct. It really isn't. And I apologize to everybody here who, is a standard bearer for political correctness. But interestingly enough, what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying over here is that the function of going into battle, there are two reasons to go to battle. One reason is to defend yourself. But it transpires there's another reason for going into battle, which is to uproot an evil that exists. And if the evilness that exists is something which is found amongst the women, then that means that's what needs to be uprooted. Again, even though it's not politically correct. Today, you know, if you do these kinds of things, so you get taken to war crimes and The Hague and who knows what, right? Especially if you're Jewish. If you're not Jewish, it's not the end of the world, right? Va'ata, says Moshe Rabbeinu, verse number 17, Hirgu chol zacha b'taf. You have to kill, all the males have to be killed. V'chol isha yudas ish lemishkav zacha haroigu. And any woman who is, I'm trying to work out how to say this in a delicate fashion, but any woman who is old enough to be able to have relations with a man, she needs to be killed. Right? Why? Because again, that was the source of the problem to begin with. And any girl who hasn't had any sexual relations, so she can remain alive.
What, does she become a slave? Or
Yeah, she'll become a shivcha. And then says Moshe Rabbeinu, V'atem chanu michutz lemachane shivas yomim. You're going to have to stay outside the camp for 7 days.
Who's this, the 12,000?
Yeah, the soldiers. Kol hoireg nefesh v'chol nogeh b'cholol tischatu b'yom hashlishi v'yom hashvi atem ushvichem. So what needs to happen over here is like, what's the problem? You go into battle, what's the problem? When you go into battle, normally you come in contact with dead bodies. A dead body is one of the most serious sources of spiritual impurity. What's called tumat met. If a person has tumat met, they become spiritually impure for 7 days, and only on the 8th day can they purify themselves. Within the 7 days that they're impure, they have to be sprinkled with the waters of the red heifer on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And only after they've done that, on the 8th day, can they purify themselves and come into the camp. Which means this is quite a welcoming committee, right? These people have gone out to battle, they've put their lives on the line in order to be able to do what Moshe told them to do, right? And then they come back, and what happens? First of all, Moshe tells them off for not doing the job properly. And then he tells them, by the way, right? You can't come home for another 7 days. You've got to stay outside because your people are spiritually impure. V'chol beged, v'chol kli or, v'chol maaseh izin, v'chol kli eitz tischato. Which means that everything that's there, anything that's been part of this battle is going to have to be purified, not just the people.
Is that where we get the kosher the Caleb?
Oh, we're going to see. We're going to see. It's coming up now. It's coming up now here, right? But before we go any further, so here it's interesting, right? The first of all, the idea of going into battle when you're Jewish, and again, we're living in an era where it's possible to purify yourself. Going into battle was not like everybody else went into battle. Everyone else went into battle, and when they came home victorious, everybody went mad. And it was a ticker tape parade, right? And over here, amongst the Jewish army, it wasn't like that at all. Going to battle, you've got to go through a process of, what do you want to call it? I don't know, detoxification, right? You've been in an environment which is very violent. You've been in an environment which is not very conducive to spirituality whatsoever. And now you're going to have to go through a process of just realigning yourself and putting yourself back to where you need to be.
Why does it work that way but not the other way? Why is there's this impetus to ancient Judaism about purifying yourself after you've done something
good,
carnal,
yeah,
brute, but before you do something brute, you don't have to.
Here, so I mean, it's a good question, right? I think the answer is simply because you can't expect everybody to purify themselves before they go into battle.
No, the other way around. To madden themselves or whatever you need to do for 7 days to
so brute. Again, I don't think you can demand that. Under normal circumstances, the Jewish people don't, they go into battle. It's normally something which is done. There's like an immediate requirement to go to war. You can't sort of turn around to the people that are on your border and say, "Listen, guys, just hold on a second. If you could give me 7 days, I just want to turn myself into some kind of, raging lunatic."
The reason I'm asking is because you mentioned the significance of that the Jewish people are special. So when they come back from horrible things like battle and they've been intoxicated by death and tumah, they need to cleanse themselves. So there's a significance about being a special people, and then you need to sort of go back to your specialness after something like battle. So there's a significance of going through processes after that.
Right.
But that means that, is it so easy to go into battle?
No. I think I think the other way. I think the other way around, actually, which means that in order for us to go into battle properly, we have to go in a spiritual state. We really do. And here, for example, the people that were chosen to go into battle over here were not necessarily the greatest warriors. They were very great tzaddikim. They were righteous people. Which means that maybe on a more spiritual level, the answer to the question is that it would be wrong to turn yourself into a more physical person, to get yourself ready to go into war by becoming more physical. If anything, it's something which you need to become even more spiritual to go into a state of battle, because we look at ourselves as being different from everybody else.
Wasn't that the role of Kohanim?
The Kohen, right? The Kohen that went into battle together with them was there in order to serve as a constant reminder that we are not the same as everybody else. What's interesting is that here, what we're learning over here is something that's very clear, that even when you send the greatest righteous people into battle, they're going to be influenced by whatever has happened over there. And that's going to require a purification process afterwards in order to get them back to where they need to get to. The Rambam Maimonides writes in Hilchos Deis, right at the very beginning, he says that our environment plays a lot. It plays a lot. It's got a lot to do with how we turn out, right? Which means that here, we're all products of our environment. If you would have been brought up in a jungle somewhere, so you would have been very different from how you are today. In my generation, many years ago, but in my generation, You know, cultures were very specific to different countries as well. You could tell where somebody came from according to the kind of culture they had today, because of the, you know, the enormous global village, you know, everything, the internet joining everything and everyone together. I think a lot of cultural identity has been lost on the way. You know, I apologize for saying this to you, but it doesn't look to me like the younger people who are actually listening, so it's okay. I think that the youth of the world, certainly in the Western world, share a certain uniformity. In my day, it wasn't like that. It really wasn't, which means that, you know, clothing that was worn would identify you from which kind of country you came from, music that you listened to, everything and anything. Today, we're much more uniform than we were. That's for sure. How did we get onto that?
Rambam.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for listening. The Rambam says that we're a product of our environments, which means that if you grow up in a certain environment, you'll turn out looking or sounding a certain way. If you come from a different environment, you'll look and sound a different way. It's as simple as that, right? You know, if you grow up in a cannibalistic society, so the chances are you'll be a cannibal. Right? If you grow up in a Western society, you'll probably look at cannibals and you imagine that these guys, you know, like they're nuts. You know, how can they do this? Right, you heard the one about the two cannibals. One says to the other one, you know, I really don't like my mother-in-law. So the other one says, that's okay, so just eat the vegetables instead. Anyway, what's Pshat? Here, they went out into war. They weren't out there for very long, but nevertheless, it had an impact on them. The impact that it had on them, now they've got to return themselves back into the spiritual dimensions they were in before they went into war. And that's what they do.
How come it doesn't say anything by Shmuel Tanakh about David when they went? It doesn't say anything about purification.
Don't know. It's a good question. I need to look into it. Actually, I need to try and look and see for some kind of a source that talks about what happened when they came back from war.
I don't think so.
Need to look. You're right. We can start in Yoshua, see what happens over there with Yoshua and the conquering the land of Israel.
Specifically in this Parshat.
Yeah. I don't know.
Is it because maybe they want to show you one of the dinim that are coming up?
Maybe. You know what, Bli Neder, I'll try and look into it and see if we can come up with something. Anyway, here, as you mentioned before, right, there's a halacha, I don't know if you're familiar with this, that utensils that you have that are used for food preparation or for eating food itself, so if the utensils are made by a non-Jew, then they need to be immersed in the mikveh. They need to be taken to a body of water and they need to be immersed inside of the water and they need to be brought up, and that way they're going to, then you can use them in a Jewish home. What is this referring to? It's referring to all kinds of things. So it's not just referring to your plates and your silverware, it's referring to your glasses and your cups, it's referring to pots and pans, it's referring to the little bits and pieces, the blades that you use in your Magimix and in your Kenwood and all kinds of things that you use to prepare food with. All of these things need to be immersed in a mikveh. Now, it's important to understand this. As a halacha, it's important to understand that it doesn't matter where you bought what it is that you've got. That's not the issue. The issue is who made it. Which means that if you go to a Jewish store and you buy a set of crockery, for example, a set of plates, flatware, so the fact that it was bought in a Jewish store doesn't mean that it no longer has to be immersed in the mikveh. It's got to be taken, it's got to be immersed anyway, right? Because who made that flatware? It was probably made by, some place either in Taiwan, or if you're a fancy, then, maybe it was made in some place in Europe. But the bottom line is that if it was made by a non-Jew, then it needs to be immersed in order to be able to be used by a Jew. If it was made by a Jew, then even if it's bought by a non-Jew, from a non-Jew, you don't have to be, bless you, you don't have to be concerned about it. You don't have to do it. Right? So, for example, if you go into one of the Jewish silver stores, like one of the big chains like Hatzofim or Hadad or whatever they're called, these places, and you go and you buy a silver Kiddush cup, so the silver Kiddush cup doesn't have to be toivel because it was made by Jews. It may have been made in Italy. It doesn't matter where it's made, right? It doesn't matter if something is made over here in Israel, but it's made by a non-Jew, it still needs to be toiveled. Still needs to be put into the water, right?
Does it have to be frequent or just one time?
Just once, right? You just do it the once, and you can make a blessing over it, and it needs to be immersed completely, and then you can wash it off, and you can then you can use it.
The term may nida. Nida's it's a woman's business.
Where are you?
May nida kaf gimel kaf daled between kaf.
Oh, hold on a second. We're going to get there, right? Let's learn. Where do we learn this halacha from? We learn it from here, from this week's parsha.
Right.
Let's take a look. Vayomer Elazar Kohen, verse number 21. El anshei hatzava ba'im lemilchama. Zois chukas haTorah shetziva Hashem es Moshe. This is a chok. It's a statute. Can I explain to you why you have to Jewify your plates?
No, makes no sense.
Nothing changes in the plate. It's not like, Mele, I don't know if you could do a bris milah on a plate, then maybe that's what we would do, but you can't, right? You're just going to immerse it in did the plate change from the beginning of the process to the end? No, it's still the same plate. And yet this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do. If you want to purify something, so if it's something which is made with fire, it needs to be purified with fire. So all of the things that are mentioned, gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, lead, right? These are all things that are made, you make them with fire, right? When you want to turn a block of gold into a piece of jewelry, how do you do that? You melt it and you pour it into a mold and you turn it into something very beautiful, right? Fire is needed in order to purify metals. I don't know if you know anything about gold, for example, but different standards of gold. The higher the gold number in carats, right? You start off at 14, and actually there's 9, 14, 18, 21, 24, right? All of that is to do with purities. It's to do with how much impurity is there in the gold. Gold in its purest form is very soft. In order to make it something which is usable, very often some impurities will be added in or impurities won't be taken out. The higher the number in carats, the purer the gold is. The purer the gold is, the softer it is as well. If you want to purify, if you've got something impure, spiritually impure, and you want to purify it, and it's made out of metal, it requires fire to be able to do that. I don't know if you've ever seen, Erev Pesach is normally a great time, right, to watch people purifying their bits and pieces, things that have ended up being, becoming not kosher over the year through mistakes that were made in the kitchen, and now they want to rectify the mistakes and be able to use the thing again, right? Fire normally is the way to do it. There's libun kal, there's libun chomor, it depends. And then it says, what do you have to do? You have to put it through fire. V'taher ach b'mei nida yizchato. And it has to be purified with the water of purification. Right? Now, mei nida, even though we talk about a woman when she is having her period, so she becomes in a state of what's called nida. Right? And that means that during that time of the year, during that time of the month, husband and the wife are not supposed to have any physical contact with each other until she goes through the process of immersing herself in the mikveh as well. But the mei nida doesn't mean, the word nida doesn't mean that the woman, it doesn't have anything to do per se with what the woman is going through, right, with her monthly cycle.
It's a mikveh issue.
It's a mikveh issue, right? In order to get to the mikveh, the woman goes through a process of being what's called nida until she can get to the mei nida, right?
Take the name from the
we take the name from the procedure, exactly. And if anything else that can't be kashered in fire needs to be kashered in water. Right? So for example, like we mentioned before, plates. How do you kasher plates? With water. You put them into the water. You can't put them into... how do you kasher things in general? You should know. Right? We also use water to kasher metal things as well. But it's got to be boiling water. And the water's got to be so hot that when you put the thing inside of the water, it continues bubbling. Right? You know what happens with water. When water's bubbling, you put something cold into it, it immediately cools down. And it's got to be on a pretty high level of heat that when you put something in, it doesn't stop the water from bubbling.
All the
Right?
same, you got to put in hot water.
Depends what. Are you talking about cutlery? We're talking about things that are made out of metal. Let's say a pot becomes not kosher, right? A mistake was made, and now you want to kosher your pot. So you can kosher it by putting it into a boiling pot of water. It's got to be taken out, and then it's got to be dunked into cold water as well. Just a practical word. Do not take anything out of that boiling water with your hands. Right? I know you're laughing, but sometimes, those things that don't need to be said, they need to be said. They really do. Right? I think that's an accepted rule of thumb. No, right? The things that don't need to be said need to be said. Right? So don't try putting your hands in there to take them out. If you've got these, they sometimes sell in the hardware stores very, very thick rubber gloves that are heat resistant, completely heat resistant. You can use those to take them out. Otherwise, you should use something to pick it up and to take it out. Right? Don't do it with your hands. It's then got to be dunked into cold water in order for it to be able to be kosher. Not only do they have to kasha, not only do they have to purify all of their utensils, but they've got to purify their clothing as well. V'chibastem, what does that mean? Either to be immersed into the mikveh, the clothing itself, or it needs to be, or to wash their clothing. Only after that are you able to be able to come into the camp.
Why was
So-
this so, the Kohanim I can understand, but why was this? This is very similar to a Kohen. They're making them Kohanim. That, the whole idea of
What's Pshat? Pshat is like this. The Jewish people are described as being a Goy Kadosh, right? We're a holy nation. We are a Mamlechet Kohanim, a nation of Kohanim, and a holy nation. In order to be a Mamlechet Kohanim, what does it mean? We're not all Kohanim. Is anyone here a Kohen? Yes, no, maybe? Once. When you were younger. It was too much work. You have to find socks every day that don't have holes in them. It's not an easy thing to do, right? But to be a Kohen, so there are two ways of being a Kohen. You can be born into the Kohen. Your father was a Kohen, so you become a Kohen. But to be a Mamlechet Kohanim, to be a nation of priests, what does that mean? That we are going to be the spiritual role models of the Jewish nation. Of the other nations of the world. Right? Which means that we have to behave in a way which reflects the higher level of spirituality that we're supposed to be on. And that's why all of this over here, right, it's very similar to being a Kohen, because the Jewish people are very similar to being Kohanim. We really are. That's what we're supposed to be. Right? We've spoken about this in the past, but the concept of something called a Chilul Hashem, desecrating God's name. You've got to be very careful when you are identifiably Jewish. You've got to be very careful about the way that you behave so that people won't look at you and think badly about the Jews. It may sound far-fetched to you, but it's not far-fetched at all. It really isn't. I think I mentioned once, I had a Talmud many years ago. There's a very, very not kosher restaurant here in Yerushalayim. I'm not going to mention its name, but it's very famous. Actually, it's supposed to be very good. And I once walked past it. It was in town. I once walked past it, and I saw this fellow. He'd been in my class the last couple of days. He'd been in the class, and he was sitting over there with his kippah on, eating. Now I knew the guy wasn't the least bit orthodox, nothing at all. He'd just come up, but whatever, he decided he was going to wear a kippah whilst he was sitting in the classes. He'd obviously forgotten to take it off, that's all. And he went off to have this meal, and I knew that it was all very innocuous, right? But what about all the other people that were walking past? What do they see? They see a guy wearing a kippah, sitting in a non-kosher restaurant, eating. What are they going to think? I mean, you know, most people are going to say, wow, these Orthodox Jews, they're such a bunch of hypocrites, you know? Of course, if we were really hypocritical, of course, we'd take our kippah off before we went in just to make sure, right? But whatever.
You know, the guy in the restaurant, he was with a kippah in a non-kosher restaurant and all that. And this rabbi passes by, and he's looking at him. And he goes in and he says, how can you eat here? It's non-kosher. He says, because you were over here, Rabbi. It was rabbinical supervision.
Yeah, they tell the story about a rabbi who is overwhelmed with a desire to eat pig. So he travels far, far away from his community, and he goes into this restaurant, and he looks at the, you know, he's reading the menu, and he decides, excuse the pun, but he decides he's going to go the whole hog, and he orders a boar's head, right? And he's sitting there waiting for this thing to come out, and as the doors open for the, you know, from the kitchen, and they bring out this tray with this boar's head and the apple, you know, stuck in it, right? And all of a sudden, one of the rabbi's members of the community walks into the rabbi. He walks into the restaurant, and he looks, and they bring this enormous boar's head and they stick it down on the table with the rabbi sitting by himself. And he says, Rabbi, what's going on? He says, wow, he says, all I did was order an apple. Look at the way that it arrived, right? Gotta be careful. Be careful where you go, right? Be careful who you get seen by. To be a mamlechet kohanim means that we gotta be very careful about the way that we behave. Here, you know what? I tell you the most incredible story. It goes back a long time though. This is before your era, before Easy Pass. It's impossible to imagine, but once there was a system where there was no Easy Pass, you just had to drive up and there was a toll. And you threw your money into the toll and you went through. There was a fellow living in Brooklyn whose wife was very pregnant, and she wakes up one morning. They have to get to the hospital in Manhattan. She wakes up one morning, it's like 7 o'clock in the morning. She says to her husband, you know, Yossi, she says, we got to go to the hospital. So he says, no, there's no way we can go. It's rush hour right now. Forget it. Let's go later. And she says to me, Yossi, you don't understand. We got to go to the hospital. So they get into the car and they drive off. They get to the battery tunnel. And the lines are all over the place. All over the place. And she's groaning on the back seat over there. And he doesn't have time for this. So they always used to leave a lane free for the security services. So he pulls out of the line and he gets into the security lane. He's driving into the tunnel. He's been going for about, less than a minute, and all of a sudden there's a blue flashing light behind him. He pulls over to the side. The fellow says to him, sir, surely you know that this is a security line. You're not allowed to go down here. So he says to the policeman, he says, look in the back. So the policeman looks in the back. He sees this. At first he thought it was a beached whale, but then he realizes that it's his fellow's wife and she's about to give birth. He says, so why didn't you phone us? We would have given you an escort. He says, I don't know. I didn't think about it. Anyways, let me get ahead of you. I'll take you in. So he gets ahead and they drive in, and Baruch Hashem, they get to the hospital, and she gave birth in the end. She gave birth in the hospital and not in the car. Anyway, on the way back later on, much later on in the afternoon, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, this fellow's on the way back. And he gets to the battery tunnel to go back into the Brooklyn area, and he gives the toll man 2 tolls. So the fellow looks at him and he says, straight away, he says, what did you have? So he says, what are you talking about? He says, what do you have, a boy or a girl? So he says, well, I had a baby girl. He says, but how do you know? He says, are you kidding? What you did this morning was a talk of the toll. Everybody was talking about it, he says. But the policeman, when he came back, you know what he said? He said, don't worry. He says, the driver was an Orthodox Jew, and on the way back, he'll pay for the toll that he didn't pay for when he went through in the morning. That's what it means to be a Mamlechet Kohanim. You hear? You hip chat. We have to be better than everyone else. We do. It's not fair, and it's not always easy, and it makes no difference whatsoever. That's what we have to do. As Jews, we have to reflect the sense of our spiritual dimensions to the rest of the world, in order that the rest of the world should be able to recognize that and look into their own spiritual dimensions as well. And that's what's going on over here. So one last idea before we finish today, which has got nothing to do with the Parshat, but it's just to do with the concept of mikveh. What is a mikveh? A mikveh is a body of water that you have to go in order to purify yourself. You go in and you completely immerse yourself in the mikveh. It's used by women, married women, on a monthly basis. I knew it was one of those difficult questions, right? On a monthly basis. And it's used by men. Some men have the custom to immerse themselves in the mikveh every morning. Some people have the custom to do it Erev Shabbos. Some people only have the custom to do it before Yom Tov or before something big. What the Maharal says the most beautiful idea over here. The concept of the mikveh, you know, water, we can't live without water. Says the Gemara, in the same way we can't live without water, we can't live without Torah. Ein mayim ela Torah, which means that the same way that physically we need to have water in order to survive, we need Torah in order to survive as well. Says the Maharal, there's the most incredible symbolism of a person immersing themselves entirely in the water, as if they're completely immersed in Torah. They're immersing themselves in a spiritual dimension, which is then going to help to bring them further up to where they were before. It's a very beautiful idea, it really is. It's telling us like this, that we really need to lead a life where we're completely immersed within what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do, whether it's learning Torah, or whether it's in our professional lives, or whether it's in our personal lives. Everything that we're doing needs to reflect, our actions need to reflect our connection with God. You can't live immersed in water for a considerable amount of time. Although, interestingly enough, we do it for 9 months when we're in our mother's stomachs, right? When we're in the womb. But afterwards, you can't do it for a considerable amount of time. But the idea of the mikveh is to try to draw us back to where we're supposed to be, right? To try to direct our thoughts back to who we really are, in order to be able to understand what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us. I think it's a very beautiful idea, I really do. I once met a businessman who told me that he goes to the mikveh every single morning. I don't think that's so normal. Right? He told me he goes to the mikveh every single morning before he starts his day, before he goes to shul, before he davens, because he wants to take that feeling with him throughout the day. Right? After he leaves shul and he goes off into the business, into his business world, and he's not so much attached, obviously, to the more spiritual dimensions. He wants to feel that he started off his day in that way in order that it should have some kind of an influence, an impact over him throughout the rest of the day as well. That's the mikveh over here. That's the concept of mikveh which is being introduced over here. It's a concept of something, it's something very beautiful. When women finish the process of having their periods and then go to the mikveh, and then that's the first night that they're allowed to have relations again with their husbands after normally a 2-week hiatus. It's interesting that moment of intense kedusha, of intense spirituality where they immerse in the mikveh, is what they're going to bring into their relationship with their husband. It's going to enhance the physical dimension of the relationship that exists between a husband and a wife. It's going to enhance that in a spiritual way as well. Good. Okay, we're gonna stop over here. Mitzvah Hashem, to be continued.